That night, as we frantically fled toward the flickering campfires of our comrades, we found the site eerily silent. Rifles, backpacks, even sleeping bags lay scattered across the ground, but the 10 fully armed soldiers had vanished without a trace. Then, just as I turned, there, at the dim edge of the firelight, a towering figure, over 8 feet tall, with amber eyes burning in the dark, locked its gaze onto me. What kind of monstrosity did we encounter during that classified training exercise in 1995? It all began on June 12, 1995. That afternoon, our company received the mission briefing. Operation Night Crocodile. The objective, a company-level night survival and reconnaissance drill. Charlie Company would be split into 3 platoon-sized elements, entering from a northern sector of Fort Polk's training grounds, trekking roughly 15 miles west through swamps and dense woodland, reaching the designated rally point within 48 hours. Along the way, we were to confirm 3 pre-marked recon points while conducting unsupplied survival training, each man carrying only 1 MRE, a liter of water, basic weapons, and night vision gear. Standard field exercise, right? At the time, none of us thought much of it. I've been a soldier for nearly a decade, done these drills countless times. I'd been to Fort Polk over 20 times, knew that swamp like the back of my hand, or so I thought. For the first 24 hours, our platoon advanced north along a dried-up riverbed, through mixed pine and oak forests, solid ground, easy movement. Leading us was Lieutenant Davidson, a young West Point grad, sharp on theory, but green in the field. He had my squad on point patrol, 200 meters ahead of the platoon, scouting and securing the route. By 1900 hours on June 12th, darkness had fully settled. We strapped on our PVS 7 night vision goggles. Those old single-tube NVGs were primitive, narrow field of view, grainy green hues, useless without ambient light. But the moon was bright that night, clouds thin, so they barely sufficed. Around 2100, we hit the real swamp. The terrain shifted fast, bald cypress and Spanish moss now dominated. The cypress trees loomed monstrous, roots like claws digging into the black water, trunks draped in grayish moss that swayed sluggishly in the breeze. Through the NVGs, the moss looked like rotting limbs hanging from the trees, the sickly green tint twisting everything into something unnatural. The water depth fluctuated, ankle deep one step, waist high the next. We moved slow, deliberate, testing each step before committing. Hard bottom or soft muck. Any roots? Any sudden drops? At 2200, we took our first break on a relatively dry hummock. Just a small rise formed by cypress roots, barely 2 square meters, rising only 40 centimeters above the water. The 4 of us stood back to back, taking turns eating our MREs. Mine was spaghetti with meat sauce, cold, the grease congealed, tasting like wax. Morales wasn't eating, just fiddling with the radio. Wade wolfed down his chicken and rice like a starving man. Jenkins sat tense, eyes darting. Then Jenkins spoke in a hushed, trembling voice. "Sarge, this place doesn't feel right." I asked why. "Dunno," he muttered, shaking, not from cold, but something else. "Just feels off, like something's watching us." I brushed it off. New guys always got jumpy their first night out here. Still, I had Wade and Morales sweep the area. The NVGs revealed nothing. Just cypress, moss, black water. The occasional ripple, maybe a fish or turtle. "You're spooking yourself, Rook," Wade said, clapping Jenkins' helmet. "Swamp's just too quiet. You'll get used to it." After 15 minutes, we pushed on. Looking back, Jenkins was right. That gut feeling of his, that was the first warning sign I should have heeded. But I didn't. Then, around 0200 on June 13th, we found the first anomaly. We were making our way through an especially deep section, the water rising to our chests, each of us feeling the thick mud at the bottom slowly pulling at our boots. It was a draining sensation. Every time you lifted a leg, you had to fight against the mud suction as if someone was grabbing your feet from below. I was at the front of the group, probing the water ahead with a stick. Then I saw something. Through the green lens of my night vision goggles, about 30 meters away, on the trunk of a massive cypress tree, there were several white marks. These marks weren't the result of natural bark peeling or branches scraping. They were vertical, stretching from about 2 meters high down into the water, each about 20 centimeters apart, in groups of 4, perfectly regular. At first, I thought they might be from some large animal. Bears aren't uncommon in the Louisiana swamps, and they can climb trees, leaving claw marks on the trunks. But then I noticed something. The claw marks were vertical and deeply gouged, as if something had used immense force to dig directly into the bark and then slide down the tree. I signaled the team to stop and gestured for Morales to come over. I pointed at the marks and asked him what he thought. Morales looked at them for about 10 seconds, then, in his usual calm voice, said, "Sergeant, I've seen bear claw marks. These are different." "How are they different?" "Bear claw marks are wider, blunter, and they usually aren't this deep. They look like fingers." Fingers. He used a strange word. Not claws, but fingers. At the time, I thought he might be joking, but when I looked at him, his expression was dead serious. His eyes, visible through the green glow of the night vision goggles, seemed unusually large. His pupils narrowed to 2 black dots. "Take your radio," I whispered to him, "and send a sitch rep to the platoon. Say, we found signs of large animal activity ahead. Recommend slowing down." He did as I asked. We continued, but at a slower pace. I reduced the distance between each team member to just 5 meters so we could see each other. The water grew deeper, reaching up to our chins at its deepest point, and I had to raise my weapon above my head to keep it dry. In such conditions, if something were to attack from the water, you'd have no time to react. The good news was that we soon emerged from the deep water. The ground began to rise, and the water level dropped from our waist to our knees, then to our ankles, and finally disappeared. We stepped onto a natural levee formed by decaying vegetation, with open swampland on either side and a small hardwood forest ahead. I checked the GPS and confirmed we were about 2 kilometers from the first recon point. That's when we heard it. At first, I thought it was the wind. The wind in the Louisiana swamps is unique. Not a steady breeze, but an intermittent gust that schemes the ground. When it moves through the cypress trees and moss, it creates a sound like a sigh, sometimes even sounding like someone whispering. We veterans call it swamp ghost talk, meaning it's just your brain over-interpreting environmental noise. But this sound was different. It came from our right, roughly at the 10 o'clock position, the distance indeterminate. It was a low-frequency sound, so low that you weren't sure if you were hearing it or feeling it. Like something massive exhaling, a breath pushed out from deep in the throat, trembling. It lasted about 2 seconds, then stopped. After about 5 seconds, it came again, then it stopped, then a third time. Each time, it was closer. All 4 of us stopped simultaneously. No one gave an order, no one spoke. We were like puppets with the same string pulled, our feet rooted to the ground, motionless. Our night vision goggles swept in unison toward the direction of the sound. There was nothing, just cypress trees, moss, and darkness. Jenkins turned to look at me. Even through the blurred outline of the night vision goggles and his mask, I could see the raw, unmasked fear on his face. His lips moved, but no sound came out. I asked him later what he had wanted to say. He said he had forgotten, but I don't believe that. I think he just didn't want to tell me, because saying that word would make the whole situation even more uncontrollable. But strangely, Jenkins' fear didn't spread to me. Not at that moment. What I felt then wasn't fear, but something more primal, more composed, alertness. A sensation of my senses operating at full capacity. My pupils dilated to their maximum behind the night vision goggles. My ears strained to catch every whisper of sound, and my skin tingled with the slightest shift in the air. I had experienced this state before, when real danger loomed, not during training, not in exercises, but in the face of genuine peril. I raised my fist, signaling for everyone to stop and remain silent. We stood there for about 30 seconds. Then the sound vanished completely. No more breathing, no more snapping branches, no more splashes. The entire swamp fell into an absolute silence. Even the cicadas and frogs that had been chirping incessantly fell quiet. That silence was unnatural. The swamp never knew absolute quiet. There was always something calling, something moving, something wriggling in the water. When everything went silent, there was only one explanation. A top predator had entered the area, and every creature had sensed its presence, instinctively hiding. Wade broke the silence first. He whispered, "Sergeant, I think we should move on." Yes, we should. I made a decision. Abandon the original reconnaissance route and head directly west, taking the shortest path back to the platoon. It violated mission orders, but I didn't care. If you were standing in my boots, feeling the goosebumps rise on my back, one by one, you would have made the same decision. We quickened our pace, almost jogging through that natural levee. After advancing about 500 meters, we entered the hardwood forest. The ground was finally dry here, the trees denser than the cypress in the swamp, their canopy blocking most of the moonlight, making the night vision goggles even less effective. But I felt safer with solid ground under my feet, no longer worrying about what lurked in the water. Then we saw the camp. We encountered a squad from the 2nd Platoon. They had arrived early at their planned nighttime halt point and were resting. Seeing them brought a wave of relief. There were people, other humans, in this dark, silent swamp where even the smallest animals had gone quiet. The sight of fellow humans was a massive psychological comfort. Their squad leader was Sergeant Fernandez, a man I got along with well, having trained together several times. He saw us approaching and stood up to greet us. "Cortez, you guys got lost, didn't you?" he said with a laugh. "Your halt point is 2 kilometers to the south." "We changed the plan," I replied. "We ran into something." "What kind of something?" I looked at his face. By the light of their small, concealed fire, about the size of a palm, just enough to heat a pot of water, his expression was relaxed and content, nothing like the tension we had just endured. This contrast suddenly planted a ridiculous notion in my mind. Perhaps everything we just experienced was an illusion? The claw marks, the low-frequency breathing, that suffocated silence. Maybe the swamp was just playing tricks on us? I hesitated, not telling him everything. I only mentioned that we had seen signs of large wildlife in the swamp, possibly a black bear, and suggested they stay vigilant. Fernandez nodded, not too concerned. He had his men make room for us to sit. We did, and Wade immediately uncapped his canteen and took 2 large swigs. Morales checked the radio batteries, and Mora used his bayonet to whittle a stick, as if performing some ritualistic act to soothe his nerves. At that moment, I thought the danger had passed. We stayed at Fernandez's camp for about 40 minutes. The platoon radioed new orders, instructing us to reach a rendezvous point to the southwest before dawn, where we would join 2 other squads for a simulated assault. I declined to question the other squads, confirmed the coordinates, and prepared to leave. Before we departed, Fernandez handed me a cup of hot instant coffee. It was probably the best coffee I've ever had. Not because of the coffee itself, but because the warmth of it in my stomach made me feel alive again, made me feel protected, safe, and sheltered by the cocoon of human civilization. I thanked him, drank the coffee, gathered my men, and stepped back into the darkness. We moved beyond the campfire's light at Fernandez, put our night vision goggles back on, and headed southwest. We trudged through the hardwood forest for about another kilometer before plunging back into the swamp. This time, it was a relatively open area, the water not too deep, reaching only to our shins. The surface was dotted with dead cypress stumps, like the remnants of some ancient, sunken civilization. The visibility was good, and with the night vision, we could see about 100 meters ahead. Around 3:45 a.m., Morales suddenly spoke up. "Corporal, the platoon is calling me," he said. "They're asking for our position." "Report it?" I replied. "Tell them we're moving through." I never finished my sentence, because in that moment, in my night vision, about 70 meters to our right, something moved against the backdrop of dead trees and Spanish moss. Imagine what you see through a night vision scope. Everything is green, varying shades of green. Brighter areas are where light is reflected more strongly. Off the water's surface, certain tree trunks, the moss. Darker areas absorb light, dark bark, shadows, and most living things. A normally sized animal, like a deer or a wild boar, would appear no larger than a thumbnail at 70 meters, and due to the low resolution, it's hard to discern specific shapes, only a vague thermal outline. But what I saw was not a thumbnail-sized outline. What I saw was a massive, dark, yet sharply defined shape. It stood at least 2 meters tall. No, maybe 2.5 meters. It was positioned between 2 dead cypress trees, leaning slightly forward, with its arms hanging by its sides, the elbows higher than the shoulders of most men. Its head was enormous, not in human proportions, but more like a canine skull, magnified several times. Its eyes, in the night vision, were bright, not glowing, but reflecting like 2 pale beads set against the green background. It looked at us, and we looked at it. Time became surreal in that instant. I couldn't tell how many seconds passed, maybe 2, maybe 10. My brain was frantically processing the visual information, trying to categorize it among the known animals. Bear? No, a bear's head is rounder, without that prominent snout. Large canine, a gray wolf? There were no gray wolves in Louisiana, and no canine could grow to that size. Not one. Then it moved. The way it moved was the most unsettling part of the entire encounter. Not because of its speed, though it was fast, but because of the fluidity. A creature standing 2.5 meters tall, weighing at least 250 kilograms by my estimation, should have moved with inertia, should have felt cumbersome, should have made noise. But it didn't. It simply, silently, and fluidly slid from one position to another, from between the 2 dead cypresses to behind a larger, living one, vanishing completely behind the trunk. The entire movement took less than half a second, with barely a sound. Jenkins screamed. It wasn't a shout, but a scream, an uncontrolled, guttural wail, as if someone had suddenly driven a knife into his thigh. He screamed and stumbled backward, splashing through the water, his M16-82 rifle slipping from his hands and sinking into the muck. Wade reacted the quickest. He almost instantly brought his M249 squad automatic weapon to bear, the muzzle aimed in the direction of the cypress tree. Morales crouched, his hand already on the PTT button of the radio. I dashed to where Jenkins had dropped his rifle, feeling around in the water for a few seconds before grabbing the strap and pulling it out of the mud. Everyone close in on me, back to back, form a circle. I ordered, my voice calmer than I expected. Wade, Morales, and Jenkins moved closer, and the 4 of us stood in the water, backs to each other, each weapon pointing outward. I checked Jenkins's rifle. Mud had gotten into the receiver, jamming the bolt and the firing mechanism. It was now nothing more than a metal stick. I drew my folding bayonet and handed it to him. "Take it," I said. "Stand next to me, watch my back." His face, illuminated by the green light of the night vision, was as white as paper. His hands trembled violently, barely able to hold the bayonet. "Corporal," Morales said, his voice unlike any I had heard before. "I'm calling the platoon, but no one is answering. Keep calling." Already did, no response. Try the backup frequency. Used it, still the same. It's not that there's no signal, it's the channel is open, but there's no one on the other end. All I hear is static. I turn my attention back to the cypress tree. 15 seconds passed. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing. No glint of eyes. No shifting silhouette. No low, guttural breath. Only the swamp, a silent, lifeless expanse, devoid of even the slightest ripple on its surface. I began to doubt my own eyes. Maybe my night vision goggles were malfunctioning? I lifted them and looked with my bare eyes. The swamp under the moonlight had a strange, grayish-blue hue, with Spanish moss hanging from the tree branches like frozen smoke. The spot where the cypress tree stood, when viewed with the naked eye, revealed nothing but a vague, black outline, indistinguishable from the other cypresses. I put the night vision goggles back down. The green vision remained empty. "It's gone," Wade said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "How do you know?" I countered. "I don't know. I just don't feel it anymore." I understood what Wade meant by feel. It was that oppressive presence that had weighed on all of us like gravity suddenly vanishing, like stepping into an air-conditioned room from the sweltering outdoors, the cool air enveloping you the moment you cross the threshold. The thing's existence, even when unseen, was palpable, and when it left, the absence was just as noticeable. but I didn't immediately order a standout. I had us maintain our back-to-back formation for a full 5 minutes, ensuring there was no sign of movement before I announced a reduction in combat readiness, though not a full stand down. Our weapons still pointed outward, but we were no longer back-to-back. I pulled Morales aside and whispered. Still no response from the platoon? None. Did you try the emergency channel? Tried it. Same thing. The channel is open, but it's just static. I glanced at my watch. Via 02 a.m. About an hour and a half until dawn. In this swamp, we were 4 men, 1 jammed rifle, 3 functional weapons, a radio that couldn't reach command, and an hour and a half of darkness. I made a decision. We're not heading to the rendezvous point, I said. We're going back to find Fernandez. Fastest route, no deviations. No one objected. No one questioned. At that moment, the orders needed no explanation. Each of us knew that the best way to deal with this thing, whatever it was to be with others. More people, more weapons, more of a human presence. We turned and retraced our steps, moving as quickly as possible while maintaining formation, visual contact, and staying within our respective firing arcs. I led the way, Wade brought up the rear, and Jenkins and Morales were in the middle. We covered about 500 meters, passing through the area of dead tree stumps and re-entering the edge of the hardwood forest. I could see the faint glimmer of Fernandez's campfire ahead, a tiny dot, but in the absolute darkness, it was as obvious as a lighthouse. We drew closer to the camp, 100 meters, 50 meters, then I smelled it. It was like someone had pressed a hot, wet, and foul-smelling blanket directly over your face. A putrid, blood-soaked stench mingled with an indescribable animal odor. It wasn't the smell of dead fish, rotten wood, or anything that should rot in a swamp. This was the body odor of something living, something that didn't eat plants or fish, something that fed on flesh, something so large that its stench spread through the air like a chemical weapon, covering a range of several meters. I've been over, retching, but nothing came up. Wade cursed from behind, and I heard him retching as well. Jenkins vomited, a splash of acid hitting the water, the sound piercingly clear in the silent swamp. The fire is still burning, Morales said, the only one of us who hadn't vomited, though his voice was tight. Why is the fire still burning, but no one is moving? He was right. From our position, about 30 meters away, Fernandez's campfire was still smoldering, a faint orange glow seeping through the cracks in the tree trunks. But we saw no one. No sentries patrolling, no one sitting by the fire brewing coffee, no one talking. Only the fire. I raised my fist, signaling a halt. The 4 of us crouched in place, weapons aimed at the camp. Through the night vision goggles, the image of the campsite gradually came into focus. I saw their gear, backpacks, weapons, armor, canteens scattered about. Rifles leaned against tree trunks, ammo boxes open, even sleeping bags spread out, as if they had been using these things just moments ago and then suddenly left. But there were no signs of departure. The state of the camp didn't suggest they had left. It suggested they had vanished. I counted the weapons. 6 M16A2 rifles, 2 M249 machine guns, and 1 M203 grenade launcher. All accounted for. Soldiers might forget many things during field training, but they never forget their weapons. Leaving them behind meant only one thing. They didn't have the time to take them. It meant that in some instant, they made, or were forced to make, a decision to flee, even without their most crucial belongings. My mind began to race. If our platoon leader and the other squads found similar signs, would they feel the same unease? I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds. Then I realized that thinking was a luxury we couldn't afford. Morales, I said, "Give me the radio." He handed it over. I picked up the handset, tuned to the emergency frequency, and pressed the PTT. Any unit. This is Charlie Company, 3rd Platoon, 3rd Squad, at coordinates H045-822. We have an emergency situation. Repeat, we have an emergency situation. Request immediate support. I released the PTT. Silence. No one responded. Not even static. The channel was as clean as a river without a single living fish. Only absolute, pure silence. I tried 3 times. Each attempt yielded the same result. Wade stood up. He stood tall, his night vision goggles perched on his helmet, eyes scanning the campsite without them. His M249 machine gun hung loosely at his side, the muzzle pointed at the ground. I had never seen Wade like this. The man was always the most reliable point of firepower, his weapon always aimed at the most threatening direction, his finger always poised outside the trigger guard. But now, he stood like a lost child in the middle of the swamp, staring blankly at the distant campfire. "Sergeant," he said, "Fernandez and his men. They weren't attacked." "What do you mean? If they were attacked, there would be gunshots, signs of a struggle, blood." "Look at that." He lifted his chin and pointed towards the camp. "There's nothing. They just disappeared." I scanned the campsite, trying to find any evidence of violent conflict. The gear was neatly arranged, the tents stood upright, and the ground was free of bloodstains. It was as if Fernandez and his 9 men had made a collective decision in 1 second to leave everything behind, stand up, and walk into the depths of the swamp, and never come back. "We're not going into the camp," I finally said. "We'll circle around it, continue north, find solid ground, and follow it to the nearest road. Before dawn, we need to cover at least 3 kilometers, getting as far away from this water as possible." "What about the platoon?" Morales asked. If the platoon was still there, someone would have responded to our calls. It's been over 20 minutes since our first call, and there's been no response. That means one thing. I paused, the platoon is gone. Or worse. I left the second half of that sentence unsaid. I didn't want to voice that word because once you say it, it becomes real. Like saying, don't let anything happen, only invites disaster. Some soldiers have this superstition. Don't speak of bad possibilities beforehand. Not because you think it will come true, but because you fear it will. We circled around Fernandez's camp, moving east along the northern edge of the hardwood forest. It was the hardest 600 meters I've ever walked. Not because of the terrain, not because of physical exhaustion, but because with every step, you were fighting an overwhelming urge to look back. A powerful, almost irresistible impulse to turn and see if the fire was still burning, to see if anyone had returned, to see if... Don't look back. I knew the rules. In a dark swamp, where predators might lurk, turning back meant exposing your most vulnerable parts, your carotid artery, your trachea, your spine, to the unknown. It meant shifting your focus away from what lay ahead. It meant you might trip, fall into a pit, or step on a snake. More importantly, turning back was a psychological surrender, a sign that you no longer trusted your senses and needed constant reassurance. And once you started down that path, you had already lost. But Jenkins turned back. I don't know when he did it. Maybe after we had walked about 300 meters. He didn't tell anyone, didn't make a sound. He just quietly turned his head, using the only functioning night vision scope on his jammed rifle, to glance back toward the camp. Then he stopped, not gradually, but abruptly, as if someone had punched him in the chest. His whole body froze, his breath held in a tense, silent moment. I felt the halt in our formation and turned around. Wade and Morales stopped too. "Rookie," Wade said, "what are you doing?" Jenkins didn't answer. I walked over to him and placed my hand on his shoulder. His body was shaking violently, like a washing machine that had lost its balance. His eyes, visible through the night vision scope pushed up on his helmet, were wide, pupils dilated to the point of consuming the entire iris, the whites bloodshot. His lips were a bluish color, not from the cold, but from sheer terror. "Tommy," I called him by his name, not his nickname. "What did you see?" His mouth opened, closed, and opened again. About 5 seconds passed before he made a sound. It wasn't a word, not a sentence, just a syllable, a primitive noise, the kind an animal might make when a predator clamps down on its throat. Then he finally spoke. "It's in the camp." His voice rasped like sandpaper against glass. "It's standing by the fire." I didn't turn back. Wade and Morales didn't either. The 3 of us simultaneously grabbed Jenkins's gear straps and almost dragged him forward. Jenkins didn't resist. He just moved his legs mechanically, his eyes still fixed on the direction of the camp. his mouth repeating the same phrase. It's by the fire, his voice growing fainter and more muffled until it became an incomprehensible murmur. We moved, not a quick pace, but we ran. Through knee-deep water, over roots and fallen branches, in the darkness where the night vision scope offered only a blurry green view, we ran. My lungs were on fire, my thighs were cramping, my boots were filled with mud and water, and with every step, I could feel the squelching between my toes. But no one cared. No one said slow down. Each of us was pushing our legs, swinging our arms, and fighting to get as far away from that camp as possible. I don't know how long we ran. It could have been 5 minutes, it could have been 15. Time was completely distorted in that state. All I remember is suddenly realizing the water had become shallower, the ground had hardened, and my feet were no longer sinking into mud and humus, but into sand, rough, light yellow sand, like the remnants of an ancient riverbed or coastline. I stopped. Wade and Morales stopped too. Jenkins almost collapsed to the ground, gasping for air as if he had just been pulled from underwater. I looked up. Through the gaps in the canopy, I saw the sky. There was a very faint light on the horizon. Not white, but a very pale blue, as if someone had lightly brushed a diluted paint across a canvas. Dawn was approaching. We sat down on the sand. No one spoke. Wade pulled out a canteen from his backpack, and we each took a small sip, passing it around. Morales started fiddling with the radio again, though we all knew it was futile. I removed the night vision scope and scanned the surroundings with my bare eyes. The sky was slowly, almost imperceptibly, getting lighter. I could see that the patch of sand we were on was about the size of half a football field, surrounded by hardwoods and cypress trees, like an island in the swamp. There were some tracks on the sand, animal footprints, maybe from a raccoon or an opossum, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that there were no signs of other human activity, no camp, no gear, no weapons. This meant we were safe for the moment. At least, that's what I told myself. I sketched a crude map of the terrain with my bayonet in the sand, marking our position, the location of the Fernandez camp, the spot where we first encountered that thing, and our ultimate goal, the nearest road. By rough estimate, it was about 6 to 7 kilometers away in a straight line. We needed to cover this distance during the day, with no radio support, no response from friendly forces, and one man with a jammed rifle. Daylight. I pinned my hopes on that word. The swamp in daylight was a different world from the one we had faced at night. Sunlight could penetrate everything, driving away the things that lurked in the darkness, banishing them back to their rightful places. At least, that's what I believed. Wade suddenly set down his canteen and turned to look at me. His expression was strange. Not fear, but confusion. A deep, almost angry confusion. "Sergeant," he said, "do you believe in that kind of thing?" "What kind of thing?" "Something that's not a bear, not a wolf, not anything I should find in my rules of engagement. Something that watches you through the night vision goggles, and the moment you turn your head, it's behind you. You know what I'm talking about?" I remained silent for a few seconds. "I believe what I see," I said. "I saw something that I couldn't classify. But I also believe that if something exists, it should be understandable. Maybe our zoological knowledge is just incomplete, or maybe the Louisiana swamp really does harbor large species we don't know about." "Bullshit," Wade said. "You know, it's not a species. It's not biology. It's something else." He didn't say the word supernatural. I knew he wanted to, but he didn't, because once he did, it would mean we admitted that we were facing something beyond our comprehension, something that rendered all our training, all our weapons, and all our tactics useless. You could shoot a human enemy with an M249, you could engage a platoon of the enemy in a tactical formation, but you couldn't fight something you couldn't even name. Jenkins was trembling. Not the violent, uncontrollable kind of tremor, but a constant, subtle shiver like bones grinding beneath the skin. He huddled on the sand, his arms wrapped around his knees, eyes fixed on a cypress tree in front of him. I crouched down beside him. "Tommy," I said, "tell me everything you saw back at the camp, in detail." He blinked slowly, as if his eyelids were weighted with lead. "I'll look back," he said. "None of you did, but I did. I wanted to see if the fire was still there, if we had made a mistake, maybe Fernandez and the others just went out to recon and would be back soon." "And what did you see?" It was standing by the fire. Be more specific. Shape, size, color, movement. Any details? Jenkins closed his eyes. The fire was still burning, a bit smaller than when we left, but still bright. In the firelight, I saw it standing in the center of the camp, right next to where Fernandez had been sitting. It was standing upright, like a person, but it was definitely not human. Its body was dark, very dark, almost black, but I could see some fur reflecting the light at the edges of the fire. Its head was the most hardest for me to... His voice choked, and a wet, gurgling sound emerged from his throat, as if something was lodged there. What about its head? It wasn't an animal's head placed on a body. It was a head that grew from a massive, thick neck. The mouth was long, and there were many teeth, very white, reflecting the firelight. I saw its eyes. Sergeant, I saw its eyes. He opened his eyes and looked at my face. They were yellow, not pale yellow, but that amber color, like the amber you see in museums, the kind that encases insect from millions of years ago. Under the firelight, they seemed to glow from within, as if the light was coming from inside them. I stood up and moved to the side. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the sky was bright enough for me to see the surroundings without the night vision goggles. I gazed at the eastern sky, watching the transition from deep blue to light blue, and then to orange and red, trying to draw some rational strength from this natural, predictable, and orderly phenomenon. I am a realist. I've been a soldier, fought in wars, seen blood, seen death. I know how this world works, what's likely and what's not. Under normal circumstances, you wouldn't encounter a 2.5-meter tall, dog-headed creature with glowing eyes in the Louisiana swamps. The odds are so low, they're practically non-existent. But the problem I'm facing now is, what do I do with my worldview after that 1% chance actually happened? My worldview is like a house I've lived in all my life. I know every brick, every beam. Then one day, someone planted a bomb inside, not to blow the house down, but to pull the foundation out from under it. Can you still live in that house? Can you still believe it's safe? Can you trust the ground beneath your feet? I didn't have time to answer these questions, because Wade was calling me. Sergeant, his voice was tight. Come look at this. He walked over. He was crouched at the edge of the sand, pointing at the ground. I followed his finger. Footprints, not ours. Our tracks came from the direction of the swamp, extending into the center of the sand, the tread of our boots clearly visible. Wade was pointing to a different set of prints coming from the opposite side, the north, crossing the sand and heading back in the direction we came from, the swamp. I crouched down and measured them with my hand. These prints were much larger than ours. The length from heel to toe was roughly double, and the width was at least the same. Each print had 5 distinct indentations at the front, not the rounded shape of boots, but something clawed, something akin to a canine's, but the proportions were all wrong. Canine prints are typically elongated, with toe pads in front and heel pads behind. These were wide and heavy, the toe impressions deep, as if someone had plunged thick fingers into the sand. This is impossible, I said, my voice louder than I intended, loud enough to startle even myself. We just got here half an hour ago. If it came from the north, crossed the sand, and went south, we should have seen it. We should have seen it. Crossing the sand meant it would have passed through our position. If we'd been here for half an hour and it crossed the sand at any point after that, it should have walked right in front of us. 4 of us for directions, for pairs of eyes. There's no way we wouldn't have seen a 2.5-meter tall creature pass within 20 meters. Unless it had crossed the sand before we arrived. Unless these prints were left earlier, last night, or a few hours ago. And when we reached the sand, it was already in the swamp. To the south, on the path we just came from. In the direction of the camp, we had just fled the Fernandez camp. I didn't share this theory with Wade or Morales. I stood up, erased the prints with my foot, and told them it was just old tracks from a large animal. Nothing to worry about. Elite. As a squad leader, I shouldn't lie to my soldiers. But in that moment, I believed the truth wouldn't do them any good. They needed to complete the mission, get out of this swamp, and return to base. They needed to know that dawn was breaking, and it was almost over. They didn't need to know that the creature might have been following us all along, invisible like a shadow from the swamp to the hardwood forest, from the hardwood forest to the sand, step by step. We rested in the sand for about 40 minutes. The sky was fully light. The sun rose over the eastern treeline, casting a golden glow over the swamp. The Spanish moss took on a soft silver-green hue in the morning light, and the cypress trunks were bathed in a warm tone. All the previous terror, the low-frequency breathing, the amber eyes, the vanished camp, began to feel distant and hazy under the sunlight, like the remnants of a dream, the kind that fades the more you try to remember it. I said to Wade, "Check your weapons. We're moving out." Wade inspected his M249, Morales' M16, and I checked mine. Jenkins had no weapon to inspect. He held my bayonet like a talisman, clenching it tightly in his hand. The sun was rising and the day was beginning, but the shadow of what we had seen and what we might still face lingered in the air, unseen but ever present. We followed the northern edge of the sandy ground and found a relatively dry, less densely wooded passage, continuing our northward journey. The swamp by day was a different beast altogether from the night. You could see the water, the trees, every strand of hanging moss. You could see what lay beneath your feet, whether it was tree roots or muck. You could see what waited 50 meters ahead. Light, just the light, was enough to make you feel safe, even though you knew the danger didn't vanish just because the sun rose. After about 2 hours, we pushed through one swamp and hardwood forest after another, finally finding a dirt road as the sky lightened. It wasn't a paved highway, just a path beaten down by military vehicles cutting through the pine forest. But to me, it was as significant as a highway, because a road meant people, a road meant vehicles, a road meant civilization. We walked about a kilometer along the dirt road before encountering a convoy of Humvees on routine road patrol duty. They belonged to the Logistics Support Battalion from Fort Polk, performing a standard supply transport. When they saw us, they stopped. The sergeant in charge got out and approached, his brow furrowing as he took in our 4 bedraggled figures. "Brothers, what's happened to you?" he asked. We must have looked terrible, soaked to the bone, caked in mud and moss, our faces a mixture of exhaustion and terror, weapons slung loosely in our hands. Jenkins's eyes were red and puffy, as if he had been crying. Wade's lips were dry and blistered. Morales carried the radio, which had failed to contact anyone since last night, like a dead comrade on his back. I looked at the sergeant, my mouth opening and closing. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to tell him what lurked in the swamp. I wanted to tell him about Fernandez and his 9 men who had vanished. I wanted to tell him our platoon was out of contact. I wanted to tell him about the set of footprints we saw in the sand. But I couldn't. Not because I doubted he would believe me, but because I had spent the entire night convincing myself to trust my senses. And when I finally stood on a dirt road, marked by the tracks of human vehicles under the light of the sun, I began to doubt myself. I began to question if those eyes were just a malfunction of the night vision goggles. If that smell was a toxin from some kind of algae blooming in the swamp. If those footprints were our own, distorted by fear. If that thing with the amber eyes standing in the campfire's glow was just Jenkins's hallucination in his extreme fatigue. "We lost contact," I finally said. "The radio's dead. We're looking for the command rendezvous point." The sergeant glanced at me, not pressing further. He let us climb into the Humvees and took us to a forward base at Fort Polk. For the next 48 hours, the training area at Fort Polk was locked down. The official story was that during a field survival exercise, 9 soldiers from Charlie Company's 3rd Platoon had become separated from command due to navigation errors in adverse weather conditions. A large-scale search operation was initiated, involving joint rescue teams from the 256th Infantry Brigade, the 5th Special Forces Group, and the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, combing the training area in a meticulous sweep. Fernandez and his 9 men were never found. No bodies, no fragments of weapons, no remnants of equipment, no signs of human presence, except for the backpacks, weapons, and ammunition they left behind at the campsite. It was as if they had neatly arranged all their gear and marched into the swamp, only to be completely and utterly absorbed by it. The 4 of us, me, Wade, Morales, and Jenkins, were taken to separate rooms and debriefed for over 4 hours each. The interrogators were not officers from our company, but two men in civilian clothes who never introduced themselves or revealed their affiliation. They just kept asking questions over and over, rephrasing the same set of queries. What do we see? What do we hear? What decisions did we make? Why did we make those decisions? What was Fernandez's state before we left? Did Fernandez show any signs of abnormal behavior? Did we see anything unusual around Fernandez's camp? I answered all the questions, but like Wade, Morales, and Jenkins, I omitted one part. We all erased the things standing in the firelight, the amber eyes, and the set of impossible footprints. I don't know if the four of us had planned it in advance, or if it was a subconscious act of self-preservation. But in the end, our stories were almost identical. We saw no abnormal creature. We were just lost in the swamp, lost radio contact, and found Fernandez's camp empty on our way back. Then we continued on and eventually found a road. I can't explain why we all told the same lie. Perhaps it was because we all knew that if we mentioned a dogman or a wolfman or anything of the sort, our careers would be over. Not just our military careers, but our careers as normal people. You'd be labeled, documented, and categorized as mentally unstable. Every time you applied for something, that word would appear in your file. Reported supernatural sightings. You'd be finished. Perhaps there was another reason. Maybe all four of us realized the same thing at the same moment. Something shouldn't be spoken of, not because you're afraid, but because speaking of them gives them power, like shouting a name in a dark room and hearing it echo back. We didn't want it to respond. We just wanted it to stay in that swamp in the early hours of June 14, 1995, and never enter our lives again. After the debriefing, we were granted a 48-hour administrative leave. I was sent to the base hospital for a full physical and psychological evaluation. The doctor said I had mild acute stress reaction, advised me to rest for a few days, and prescribed some sedatives and sleep aids. I took the prescription, but never filled it. I returned to my barracks, took an excruciatingly hot shower, adjusting the water temperature to the point of almost scalding my skin, hoping that the burning sensation would sear away the memory of the lingering odor. It didn't work. For many nights afterward, I would wake up around 3 in the morning, not because of any sound, not because of any dream, but purely, without any warning, just awake. I would lie in the darkness with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, sensing something standing outside the window. Not just sensing, but knowing. Just as you knew in the swamp that something was watching you, I knew something was standing outside the window, behind a layer of glass, in the night, with amber eyes staring in my direction. I never dared to look. 17 years have passed. I retired from the military, got married, then divorced and held job after job, always resigning after 3 or 4 years, with no reason, no explanation, just waking up one morning and feeling the sudden need to leave, to change cities, to change jobs, to change identities. I don't know if this has anything to do with that night in 1995. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Maybe I'm just a person who isn't meant to settle down. Maybe something in the Louisiana swamp permanently altered my nervous system, turning me into an animal always on the move, always fleeing, and never trusting any place is safe. In March this year, I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. When the doctor told me the news, I didn't feel fear or anger or sadness, but a strange, almost laughable sense of relief. No more running. No more staring at the ceiling at 3 in the morning, too afraid to look at the window. No more worrying about what would happen if that word appeared in my file. Everything was going to end, not in that dark, damp, cold swamp with its low, raspy breathing, but in a bright, clean, antiseptic-scented ward. The contrast seemed both absurd and oddly grateful. I contacted Wade. He lives in Texas now, a high school PE teacher, married with 2 kids. We talked on the phone for about 20 minutes, discussing the weather, his kids, and the season's record of the basketball team he coaches. Neither of us mentioned 1995, as if that year was covered by a black cloth and no one dared to lift it. Finally, just as I was about to hang up, he said one thing. "Sergeant, do you remember those footprints we saw in the sand? You stepped on them a few times and said they were just old marks, nothing to worry about." I fell silent. I didn't argue with you back then because I thought you were right, old, not worth worrying about. But later, I kept thinking, how did you know they were old? You didn't touch them, didn't feel them, didn't smell them, didn't do any tests. You just took one look and said they were old. But you were right. They were indeed old because we waited in the sand for 40 more minutes and saw nothing. I kept wondering how you could tell just by looking. How could you be so sure that the thing had already left before we reached the sand and not just arrived after we got there? I don't know how to answer him because the truth is I wasn't sure. I wasn't at all certain when those footprints were made. I said they were old because if they were new, it would mean the thing had just passed by before we arrived and it could still be nearby, watching us. I said they were old traces because I needed to believe they were old in that moment. I needed to believe we were out of danger. I needed to believe that everything would be better when the sun came up. I needed to believe. Perhaps this is our deepest fear, not the thing itself, but our own fragility, our susceptibility to being dominated by fear, our desperate need to believe in something we know isn't real, just to keep our hearts beating. I don't know if Wade, Morales, and Jenkins ever dreamed about those eyes again. I never asked them. Maybe one day I'll call and ask. Maybe I won't. But one thing I'm certain of, the Louisiana swamps existed long before that night, and they will continue to exist long after. The cypress trees will keep growing, the Spanish moss will keep swaying in the wind, and the black water will keep flowing slowly through the roots. And somewhere in this land, in the uncharted, unmapped, untouched corners, something still remains. It doesn't care whether we believe, whether we name it, whether we are terrified in the early hours of some June morning. It just exists. Always has. As for what those amber eyes were, an undiscovered giant canid, a biological weapon that escaped from a military lab, or something far older, more primal, something that has waited in these swamps for millions of years before humans even climbed on a land? I have no answers. I only know that if you find yourself in a Louisiana swamp in the dead of night, hanging with Spanish moss, and if you feel all the sounds suddenly stop, and if the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, and if your skin senses an odor that shouldn't exist, don't look back. Never look back.